When I was 5 years old, I discovered that I was black. You can laugh. I realize it sounds absolutely ridiculous to say, but it's totally the truth. I grew up in this little town called Devil's Lake. It's a city about an hour and a half west of where we are right now, 7,000 people. And aside from my family, that's my little sister behind me in that picture, I was surrounded by white faces. And for the first 5 years of my life, I thought that I was one of them. It wasn't until this little girl refused to sit next to me one day because she said I was dirty that I realized I was different. I remember looking down at myself and thinking, dirty, well, that's inaccurate. And looking over at her and then back at myself again and going, oh, she thinks I'm dirty because I'm darker. Oh my God, I'm different. And I had this moment of absolute panic, what do I do now? But I called this little girl over and I remember showing her the back of my hand, showing her my skin and saying, it's not dirt, it's just my skin. I told her, I'm just different, and that's okay. And this little girl went off and she grabbed her friends and she told them she's just different and that's okay. And she brought them back to play with me. Now in that moment, that little girl became my amplifier. She went out into an environment I might not otherwise have been able to go and advocated for my needs where I might not otherwise have been able to do so. Pretty sweet, right? Fast forward a couple of decades now, I'm checking out at a store in town when the woman behind me uses the N-word to describe a group of non-English speaking black men behind her. I turn around to call her out and she physically threatens me. Not so cool. A lot of people think because Jim Crow is over and we can all drink from the same water fountains now that racism is over. Not the case. Racism is still very much alive and well in this country, particularly in small-town America. Now, I say that with the realization that what I'm about to share might be a little bit uncomfortable to hear. Nobody wants to hear anything negative about their hometowns. Nobody wants to hear that their behavior might be contributing to a larger problem. But I want you to trust me, because we're going to come out on the other side of this with solutions and tools that are going to make us feel great, I promise. But I got to set the ground with some research first. And that involves some numbers I want you to remember. 16 and 51. 16 is the percentage of Americans who live in rural communities. Doesn't seem like a very big number, but remember that other number I gave you, 51. That's the percentage of Americans who live in suburbs, which are basically rural communities that cities haven't managed to swallow yet. So when you combine those two numbers, 16 and 51, that's some serious voting power, right? White supremacists know this. We'll get to why that matters in a second. Here is a map of all the active hate groups in the United States, 939 of them. Now, naturally, in the former Confederate States of America, the southern US, you're going to see some pretty large hate groups. And naturally, in larger cities where there are more people, you're going to see more hate groups and you're going to see more people in them. That's a given. But check out some of these more rural communities where people are a little bit more spread out, but there still seems to be quite a bit of hate. Southern tier of Pennsylvania, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Check out the plains of Montana and Oregon. There's even one in North Dakota. Hate thrives in rural communities. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, how do you know that? You know, it's one thing to have a bunch of extremists living in your neighborhood, but a lot of these people think that these groups are inactive. Not the case. Got another map for you. Here's one of hate crime rates by county in the United States. Now, it is important to note, if you look at the southern states, you're thinking, that looks suspiciously quiet, right? Yeah, there's a little something going on there. This is a list of documented hate crimes in the United States. Many hate crimes in the South don't even get reported, let alone investigated enough to be documented. But there's some valuable information here, right? Some of the most atrocious acts of hate, the most regular acts of hate, are happening in rural communities. Check out where number 2 is. Slope County, western North Dakota, number 2 in the entire country. There's a problem, right? So now the question becomes, how does this happen, right? How do we get to this point? Well, white supremacists move into these small little communities and they align themselves with people who are ethnically, economically, and religiously like themselves. And then they start to slowly feed them these little tidbits of hate, like, we were all better off before insert minority here came to town. And because there's usually very little, if any, of insert minority here around to defend themselves, it starts to become a conscious part of that town's makeup that minorities don't move there, because the racists have become the policymakers. Case in point, 16 of our states don't require any education in school whatsoever about the civil rights movement. 16 of them. North Dakota is one of those states. But it's not the only northern state that's a problem. Utah, Montana. In fact, you could literally go down the list of states that don't require any education on the civil rights movement, and you could match it with those top states with high rates of hate crime and hate groups. So we got a problem, yes? Yes. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, oh my God, I don't think this whole solving racism thing can be done. She's just showed me that it's rampant. How are we supposed to fix this? Well, we can. Here's how. Remember that little girl from the first story I shared with you? She went out into her group of friends and told them, she's just different, and that's okay. She amplified my voice. She advocated for my needs in a group of people that might not have wanted me around, let alone wanted to be my friend. Our society needs more amplifiers. And I believe that you have the power to be one of those amplifiers. But it's not going to come from going out and deciding that everyone that disagrees with you is racist, redneck, trailer trash. And it's not going to come from wishing we could all just get along and don't see color and let's all just sing Kumbaya, right? It comes from the conversations. When people talk, they think. When they listen, they understand. When they converse, they grow, and growth equals change. So let's grow together, shall we? Yeah, let's grow together. We're going to solve this like a math problem. We're going to start with listening, and then we're going to add talking, and that's going to give us our result of conversing, of growth. But we're going to solve it like an algebra equation. We're going to go backwards. Talking is our x, the variable we're going to solve this for, because that's where people tend to freak out the most, finding that place to begin. But in order to do that, we really have to dig into this idea of conversing and growth and why that's important first. I believe that conversing about race can be uncomfortable, right? That's a reality. And so often conversations about race either don't start or they end prematurely because people are uncomfortable. But if you think about it, so is growth, right? When bones grow and bodies change, that's an uncomfortable process. But it's also a necessary one, right? Growth happens with or without your approval. But there are things that you can do to make it healthy. And those are the tools we want to give you here today. Growth should be like a raging current in your life. Good conversations should be like a raging current in your life. They should leave you feeling inspired and wanting more. But I recognize that looking at that raging current might terrify you at first. So here are a couple of tips as we get going on this journey. Number 1, trust yourself. You got this. Number 2, embrace the fear. Recognize it's going to be a bumpy ride, and you'll probably capsize a couple of times, but it's going to be totally worth it, I promise. And number 3, manage your reactions. Don't jump to conclusions or assumptions. Don't tip yourself over. Allow yourself to dig deep, hold on, and grow. I believe that good conversations, good growth, starts with listening. It's the foundation to a good conversation. It's your raft. Without it, you have no chance of riding these conversational waves successfully. So how can you be a better listener? Number 1, ask questions with sensitivity. It might seem like this whole questions thing and asking might be more of a talking point than a listening point, but I believe that how you ask questions is an aspect of listening. It shows how invested you are in the answer. So don't just ask yes or no questions or questions that are loaded with vitriol, like, what's your problem? What do you want? Ask, how can I help? Ask, what do you need right now? And once you've done that, infuse your listening with a compassionate understanding. It might seem natural for people to trust you after you've offered to listen to them. You might feel like people should feel grateful for you offering to listen to them, but that might not be the case. There are many instances in minority communities where people gave their trust to individuals they thought had their best interest at heart and then were wounded deeply in return. So that might come back at you sometimes, that distrust. It might come back at you in the form of straight-up animosity. But remember, if that happens, it's not about you. It's about the system. And if you are truly committed to making change happen in the system, you'll stick it out and you'll let your conversation partners know you're in it for the long haul. You can tell them, I understand you've been hurt in the past. I want to help change that. Help me understand how I can change that. And that's the value of a good conversation, right? Balancing talking and listening with tact for the betterment of all that are involved. Now you've built some trust, right? Now is when you can introduce new ideas to steer the conversation. Talking is our oar, but always make sure and check in that you're doing so with sensitivity. Don't be silent when you see racism happening around you. Encourage people to dig deep and find the layers of the situation they might not otherwise be seeing. There's always multiple perspectives to any situation, and you can encourage people to dig deep and look for those. Avoid using words like thug or killer cop that are really inflammatory in your conversations, and encourage the people around you to avoid using those words too. We're all in this together. And then ask sensitive, open-ended questions. This is a carryover from our listening point, but I want to add a couple of tags here. Ask specific, sensitive, open-ended questions to the specific individuals that the situations in our day-to-day lives affect. Ask people of color in your communities how they feel about the indictments or lack thereof in cases in our country. You can say, I heard there wasn't an indictment in this case. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the way that the media is covering it? And then, as you're listening compassionately to their answers, look for common ground. Now, we all come from our own truths and experiences, so I want to caution you against trying to equate one person's experience to another, or mine with yours or anybody else's. But when we look for common ground, when we look for the things that bring us together, our shared experiences, our efforts are instantly doubled, right? 2 people rowing in a boat is better than 1 person stirring themselves around in a circle. That stuff matters. Here's a bonus tip for you. Let minorities self-identify. Ask them, do you prefer to be called Black or African American? And then use the labels they give you. Case in point, my parents are from an island in the Caribbean. I'm not African American. Black, please. I will also accept Caribbean American. But that stuff matters, right? That's part of how you build trust. And that's the foundation of a good conversation. Trust, listening, compassion. Those are the things that see us moving forward towards the betterment of all in our society. Good conversations bring us together. Good conversations challenge society's norms. Good conversations are how we take action. Think Martin Luther King. His movement would never have survived without the many people who amplified his voice. And not just politicians, right? Celebrities, artists. Harry Belafonte, Joan Baez, right? Pair them with JFK and Robert Kennedy, and the movement would never have survived without them. Historically, change happens when worthy voices are amplified. I want to share one last story with you before we close up here. In September of 2013, in a little suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina called Mecklenburg, a young Black man was shot by police. A shooting that resulted in his death and could have been avoided entirely had a productive conversation been allowed to take place. His name was Jonathan Ferrell. Jonathan crashed his car near the suburb that I mentioned, Mecklenburg of North Carolina, and he went to knock on the door of a house near where the accident happened to ask for help. The owners of the house called 911 instantly upon seeing him, pulled back the curtain, saw it was this young Black man, and hit the panic button on her alarm. You can listen to the 911 tapes. The amount of fear this woman jumped to instantly is astounding. When the police arrived on the scene, and Jonathan moved towards him, they hit him with a taser and then opened fire, shooting 12 times without asking a single question. Now, naturally, there's much that could have been done to avoid Jonathan's death. Asking some questions on the part of the officer might have made a difference. Asking some questions and listening compassionately when he tried to tell them why he was there might have also been valuable for the homeowners. Think of the trust that's been broken with Jonathan's family now, with his community. Change will be a challenge for Mecklenburg, North Carolina. But change is already coming as people talk about Jonathan's case and amplify the voices of his friends and family. There's been an indictment in that case now. That's a big deal. The officer was charged with manslaughter and saw his first day in court this past December. That kind of thing says to the Black community, we understand that you lost someone, And we understand that there are many unanswered questions in these cases, and we want to help you get those answers. We want you to feel safe. I believe small town America is key in helping minorities feel safe in their communities. We are those final frontiers where diversity is still kind of a new concept, and where change is a challenge. But important conversations are happening every single day in small town America, just like that little girl that I mentioned in the first story I shared with you. These people grow up together and they vote together. And as people move in and out of those communities and into others, change happens, growth occurs. I believe in the power of small town America to help make diversity more accessible and more sustainable for our country. And I believe in the power of amplification, in the power of you to help make that happen. So we're going to take a little pledge right here, right now. Wherever you are, I want you to put one hand over your heart and another one in the air. Trust me, right? Yeah. And we're going to say this together. Repeat after me. When I leave this space, I pledge to be an amplifier. I will talk with sensitivity. I will be an asker of questions. I will listen with compassion. I will make of myself an offering of peace and understanding. I will embrace the knowledge that this may be an uncomfortable process. But I will not stand by and let racism thrive when I can do something about it. I will be an amplifier. I am an amplifier. Thank you. Let the good conversations roll.